Hi YouTube. Oh, this is my first official video. I don't even have a YouTube channel yet. I'm gonna try and get one up and running tonight. I'm a truck driver, so this will probably lean towards the trucker universe. Hopefully I'll get an audience with the few truck drivers out there who still speak English. That's not a joke. And so anyway, this will be my first official video. It's April 1st, start date 2019, and I'm in Iowa on my way to Des Moines. I've been driving all day, so I'm pretty tired. I'm wearing the sunglasses because my eyes are bloodshot, so I don't really want to show them to you. First thing I want to talk about is the new Beatles movie that's coming out in June. I call it a Beatles movie because it's obvious after watching the trailer that it wouldn't be much of a movie except for the fact that the Beatles music is involved. But because of that, I think it's going to be a monster movie. Maybe on the magnitude of, say, a Jaws or Star Wars, as far as how many people are going to go see it. It's gross revenue. I watched the trailer last night, and I also watched reaction videos to the trailer. It was very interesting. There's all kinds of dynamics at work here. What will be interesting will be watching young people, like your kids, react to this movie if they've never heard the Beatles, or if they only have a cursory knowledge of some of their music. That'll be interesting if you can take a couple of kids with you just to see what happens there. It's one of those movies where you're in a different universe, a universe where the Beatles did not exist, and it's 2019, present day, and you're basically transported into that world where there's only one human being who has knowledge of the Beatles universe. And so you've got the struggling musician who wakes up in a hospital with the Beatles universe knowledge in his head, and no one else in the world remembers the Beatles. Low battery, so might die. Hope not. And it's a great high concept idea. I mean, it's a great vehicle for Beatles music. It's obviously a time tested idea. It's been done before, but I think it's been long enough that it seems novel, and the fact that it's the Beatles, the fact that you're actually going to remove them from the universe is an amazing concept. You think about it. If you know anything about popular culture from the last 50 years, I think we actually peaked in 1969. I think you could basically stop and get off the world right then, because it's been a slow downhill slide since then. I saw Apollo 11 about 3 weeks ago, which is a documentary about the first landing on the moon. And what struck me is that this movie seems to be, this is like the 50-year anniversary of the Beatles. If you think about it, the Beatles were over in 1969. I mean, they still had a record to release, I believe, in 1970, but they were done in 1969. They were no longer a band. And 50 years later, we're still remaking the Beatles. This is likely going to be the #1 grossing movie of 2019. I think it may be the #1 grossing movie of all time, just based on what I saw, based on the fact that everybody from the age of 80 down to 13 is likely going to want to see this movie. Even if the 13-year-olds don't want to see it, the parents or the grandparents are going to drag them to the theater. It's a worldwide phenomenon, the Beatles. I mean, Beatles are huge in Asia. The Beatles are huge in Russia. 60s music is enjoying a renaissance in other parts of the world. You never know what's going to happen. I would not be surprised if this movie doesn't gross $10 billion. I honestly would not be surprised. That's staggering. I know it's a staggering number. But just like with Star Wars, I think I went and saw Star Wars 6 times when I was 14. And I think you're going to have a lot of Beatles fans who will go see this movie probably 5, 6, 10 times. As long as the music's done well. And as long as it's presented in such a way that it kind of reinvigorates the idea of the freshness. You know, just like anything, if you listen to music too much, I don't care if it's the greatest song ever written, you can't listen to it every day. And so a lot of Beatles fans, and me included, have listened to these songs so much that, you know, they actually become stale. But if you use a vehicle like this, it kind of gives you the sense that you're hearing it again for the first time. It reminds you of how exciting it was to hear some of this music for the first time. It also makes you think. This is going to be one of those movies where people walk out and they're going to be talking about it all night long. They're going to be talking about it over dinner. They're going to be talking about it the next day, because it's going to make you think about what kind of impact, you know, the Beatles, Liverpool, London have had on the world. You know, the British invasion didn't just come to America. It came to America and then it jumped over. I don't know if many people realize the Beatles were in Japan. The Beatles had concerts in the Philippines. And everywhere they went, all over the world, it didn't matter if they spoke English or not. It was a packed stadium everywhere they went, to the point where they stopped touring in 1966 because they simply couldn't produce the music that they wanted to produce and tour at the same time. And that catalog is extraordinary. And one other thing I wanted to talk about, it's not, if this movie's done right, they're going to deal with subjects like, not only did the Beatles disappear in that universe, but every artist who was influenced by the Beatles. And that's pretty much every artist. I mean, I've listened to interviews with Pete Townsend and Jimmy Page, all of these great bands of the 60s that came right after the Beatles, Mick Jagger, all these Rolling Stones, all these bands will point to Ed Sullivan, the explosion of the Beatles in America, the realization in their mind that it is an unlimited universe out there. If you can produce good music, you're going to make a fortune, you're going to be a star. And the Beatles led the way. All up into the 70s with the post-British invasion bands like ELO, Oasis, Queen, and on and on and on. You listen to interviews of these guys when they're asked the questions, who were your influences? Almost all, if not all, I've listened to hundreds, say John, George, Paul, and Ringo. I saw them on Ed Sullivan. That was it for me. I went and grabbed the guitar, and the rest is history. So it's not just the Beatles. If they do this movie right, they're going to also talk about the fact Elton John doesn't exist, or Pink Floyd doesn't exist, because they never saw the Beatles perform. They never got inspired. So music kind of went from Technicolor down to black and white, maybe to the point where in present day it's just not as much a part of people's lives as it is, you know, in reality, the way it is. So that would be an interesting thing for them to touch on. I don't know if they will, but I can think of a few things that I hope they're going to touch on. One more thing, if I was making this movie, I would start this movie out by having a little vignette in Liverpool, or actually it was London, where the Beatles met George Martin for the first time. George Martin says that if he had known that the Beatles had been rejected by every other record label in London, he would never have agreed to meet them. And just that simple fact, if you had that little vignette where, say, Martin says, no, I don't want to meet the Beatles, they've been rejected by every record label in London, and after that rejection, you have a little scene where, you know, John and Paul are talking, and John says, to hell with it, I'm done with music, I'm gonna go back to school, and Paul ends up being a janitor. That'd be a good way to kind of flash back to say that's what happened when there was that disturbance in the force, or God snapped his fingers, or whatever happened, to kind of remove the Beatles from history. I think that would be kind of an interesting little scene to put in there. I mean, obviously they probably don't have anything like that in there, but I hope this movie's done right. The trailer is awesome. You never know until you see the movie, but I suspect if they do this movie the way I think they have done it, it's going to be a monster hit.